Oftentimes, so many people are searching for how to start a podcast to how to market it. And don't worry, we already have content about that. So feel free to check that out. But today I want to focus in on the bones of what makes a great podcast. I think that breaks down into 5 different components in no specific order. So item number 1 is a compelling story. It doesn't matter how much you might like a topic. If it's dry, your audience just isn't going to care. And this means you have to kind of map that out and prepare. It is very easy to think that all you need to do is get a microphone, get a camera, get some lights, and you're ready to get started. And that's just not the reality of things. You want to outline your content to make sure that you're, 1, touching on key components, and 2, ensuring that you are pulling your audience into the conversation. Now, if you are a sexist society or if you have a podcast that's on current events, you might think to yourself, well, wait a minute, how is this different? Well, it's in how you tell the story. That includes your tone of voice. As you can hear, even me right now, I'm super excited just to be on camera, sharing information and connecting with my audience. That matters as well. So when you're telling a story, you want to ensure that you are understanding what your audience wants to know about this. What is the vantage point that you can take that nobody else has taken before? And that's the thing. Like whenever I see breaking news and I see a podcast who's talking about it, and you'll see where it's every podcast is now picking it up because they're a current events podcast. But I say like how you tell the story makes a difference of who comes to you. Like when something breaking comes, why do people go to the shade room? Why do they go to Baller Alert? It's because of how the information is going to be presented to them. So part of being a good storyteller is figuring out how your audience wants to receive the information from you specifically. Next up is how you capture their attention. So item 2 is really about how quickly can you get your audience to focus in and dive in. We technically these days have 3 seconds. And I know because I say to myself all the time, what can I say in 3 seconds to pull you into this conversation? And that's the whole premise of it. But here's the good thing about podcasting. Your editing does matter. You don't have to tell the story in 3 seconds. It could be that you say something really compelling throughout your podcast episode that your editor or videographer is able to pull and put in the beginning. We call this a pre-roll. The premise of a pre-roll is that we're taking a portion of the conversation and turning it into that 3-second soundbite that pulls you in and kicks the conversation off. I love this, and this is something that we do for many of our clients here at Adode Media. We place pre-rolls in your video as well as your audio and do away with what we call as a standard intro, which is where you're talking about, welcome, we are X, Y, and Z show, this is your host. We've done away with that. In this day and age, you really have to move beyond your standard intro and figure out new innovative ways to capture your audience's attention in 3 seconds. Like that is literally all the time we had. And that's why it's important not to make things longer than they need to be. Next up, item number 3 is engaging a dynamic host and guest. Now, I know that so many people want to start podcasts. And quite frankly, I'm not one of those people who believes that everyone should have a podcast. And let's take a quick moment to really reflect on that. Exactly. Everyone doesn't necessarily need to have a podcast, but of course you do need to have a medium of an outlet. That could be a blog, that could be a podcast, that could be a video diary, whatever the case may be, but podcasting is not for the masses. The reason for this is attention span and understanding your reason for creating the podcast. If you want people to engage, you want them to be pulled in, that means you're going to have to really show up with your A game. Sometimes when I don't feel like it, I still have to sit up and say, okay, let's kumbaya, take a deep breath, and I'm ready to go. Let's talk about how you can be an engaging and dynamic host is by showing up as your true self. Now, I know it can be easy to think you need to be a certain way on camera, a certain way for your audience, but guess what? People can feel when you're not being authentic. That transparency, that authenticity. And I'm not saying that you need to share every bit of your personal life in order to be transparent, but people want to connect with you. The data shows that when people feel like they can relate to a host, they're more likely to tune in, subscribe, and I want you to think of the last podcast you listened to. What did you like about it? How was that beneficial? Is it the content or is it the host? Like, what makes you come back week after week? I can bet there's a part of yourself that you see in that host. And that's the whole premise of podcasting is you're creating an audience of people who can see themselves in you. And as a brand, as a business, it's also important that when you find either somebody from your team or you are developing your own persona, that you are showing up in a way that is most authentic to you. This also applies to your guest. Now, here's the thing. I've seen people say, I don't need to know all these details about the guest because I trust the host. I trust you as the host to find engaging guests and good guests. You do not want to lose that trust from your audience by bringing on a guest who is not up to par. And that looks like doing some pre-screening, whether that's questionnaires and having forms. Some people even go as far, at least here at Adode, we do a pre-screening questionnaire. It is a document where we are able to get more details, and sometimes we even have a phone call. And yes, we do guest management for our clients. It's important to us to take these things off of our clients' plates so that this way it's one less thing that you have to worry about. So in our guest booking process, we're doing research to see other videos that you've shot, other podcasts that you've been on, how you've promoted that content. So we can see if one, you'll be good on mic, and two, if you'll actually help in moving the needle forward for discoverability and sharing it with your audience. Item number 4 is interactive community building elements. So what does that mean? It is very easy to start a podcast and just let it be you talking on camera, talking into the microphone, and that is it. And guess what? There is nothing wrong with that. But if your podcast is a part of your bigger brand or bigger strategy, it's important to really engage with your audience. That looks like listener Q&As. That looks like social media engagement. That looks like live events and live shows. It is very easy to get into the rut of just post it and forget it. And I always say this, you have to be social to bring together the social elements of social media. So that looks like engaging with your audience on their page and resonating with them. And I know you're probably thinking to yourself, oh my goodness, this is now a full-time job just for me to make a good podcast. Well, that's why we exist. We take on those elements, so it's one less thing you have to worry about. But let's talk about like listener Q&As. I love a good Q&A. And if you think about some of your favorite society and culture shows, they do something really well that I would love to see more brands, more businesses incorporate into their podcasts. They take things that they've seen on Reddit. They take elements that they've seen on Facebook groups, and they turn it into this engaging Q&A type situation that brings the conversation to life. It brings the audience in because there's somebody probably listening who's had that same experience. This helps with that growth and that discoverability because then people start talking about it. This is not saying it has to be something salacious. I've even seen where one of my favorite ones was somebody talking about how they like their pasta. And some people like their spaghetti with the meatballs and everything mixed together, and other people like it mixed on top. Some people like it separate. Like, it's a whole thing. And before this, I'm just going to be honest with you guys. Come close. Before this, I did not know that people did it differently. I had always been under the impression that everybody did the same things that I did. And then I went on a whole rabbit hole of Googling how many people, like, how do the Italians do it? What should be done about it? And that's the whole thing about creating a live experience. It engages your audience. It gets them to even look at the comments, make a comment, and you're really starting a conversation about something as simple as spaghetti. And that's exactly it. I think sometimes when we think of engagement and discoverability, as brands and as creators, we think it needs to be salacious. And that's not always the case. It's about knowing, back to that first portion, of knowing who your audience is, knowing what they want, and then you're able to kind of create those experiences around it. Social media engagement, I'm always going to say you have to engage in order to create that. But the last is live events. Live events were really big. I mean, when I broke into podcasting back in about 2018, 2019, I used to go to other podcasts that I really enjoyed throughout Atlanta to their live shows, to their live events, their meet and greets. And it was just a great way to meet other people who were listeners. And here's the thing about it. Your audience does most of the work because we're excited to meet other people and talk about, oh, what's your favorite episode? What other podcasts do you listen to? Do you have a podcast? So live events really does allow for you to have that bang. Last but definitely not least, to have a standout good podcast, it's actually something that is easy but hard, and that's consistency. Most podcasts do not make it past episode 3. And the reason for that is because many people think that a good podcast is having a good microphone, camera, lights, and go. A lot of people don't recognize all of the elements that go into it, nor do they set realistic expectations. This then leads to a lack of consistency with creating your content and showing up week after week. I think how we create consistency and how you should go about this, and this is what we really recommend to our clients here at Adode Media, is that one, don't try to do the same thing that everybody else is doing. What this means is so often everyone wants to launch a weekly podcast because that's what everyone else is doing. But you're not asking yourself, does a weekly podcast really work for my life, what I have going on, and what I can really realistically do? So that's element 1. Maybe you should be bi-monthly. Maybe you should be monthly. Because if the whole premise is just as a way to connect, why does it have to be weekly? Item 2 with consistency is developing outlines. And this makes a world of a difference, like having a repository of content that you want to record so that this way you're outlined, you have your bullet points, and you can really know how to stay on track. And item number 3 with being consistent is batch recording. Having a bank of content really does allow for life to happen. And that's the thing about consistency. You can show up week after week, month after month, when you have left room for your life to actually take place. I say that your podcast should fit into your current life and not you trying to fit your life around your podcast. That's just not realistic because when the glitz and the glamour dies down and you're doing it on your own, it becomes very difficult. So let's do a quick recap on the bones of a good podcast. Item number 1 is compelling content and amazing storytelling capabilities. That's understanding what angle you're coming from, your niche, as well as knowing who your audience is and planning ahead. Item number 2 is capturing your audience's attention quickly. You have 3 seconds to capture people's attention and get them to understand why this episode and this video is important. Item number 3 is being engaging as you as the host, as well as being authentic. Same thing for your guest. You don't want somebody who doesn't really match your vibe. You are lively and fun, and then your guest is just kind of like, oh, I'm just here. That's not going to be very fun for your audience. And that looks like creating some gatekeeping elements, shall we say, so that this way, not just everybody can be a guest on your show. Item number 4 is interacting with your community and building like elements around that. That could be live Q&As. That could be people calling in. I love the call in. Like if we think of when we were younger, I don't want to age myself. We would call into the radio station and baby, the way I would tell my friends, oh my God, listen in. I'm on there. It was an exciting thing. It's the same thing with podcasting. We still love hearing our names and our voices on air. And last but definitely not least is consistency. That is key. If you want to break the rut of not making it past episode 3, you have to have a plan in place, outline your topics, have a bank of topics and a bank of episodes. If you're like, this is a lot for me to do, and I know that I want to build out a podcast as part of my brand, my marketing elements, go ahead and reach out to us here at Adode Media. We really take the hassle off of you so that this way you can just show up and be talent and just worry about how amazing you look. So if you're ready to take the hassle out of podcasting, reach out to us at adodemedia.com, and we can't wait to support you. Until next time, have a good one.